Yeah, you would think I don't know anything about technology, Alex, but I was using ICQ, like I'm vintage too, buddy.
Yeah, me too. That was yeah, pre-web BBS Usenet era.
Hmm.
So yeah, someone asked me like, when did you download your first video on YouTube? I was like, I think I downloaded my first video in 1992. But
Which, yeah, that's an interesting comment, since my first question for you was, what's your motivation or what inspired you to make this documentary?
well, I've been making docs around technology for a bit, and I've been pretty immersed in the internet since the public birth of it in the early '80s, when most folks got on
Right.
in the dial-up pre-web days, and the rise of internet community that time was very compelling to me. Sort of the beginning of the BBS Usenet era, and the democratization to a degree of global culture, which we just never seen. I'd never seen anything like it before.
Mm.
My first doc was about Napster, which was really the first large scale global online community, which is, in my mind, why it was significant, much more than the music sharing, piracy, whatever you want to call it, part,
Right.
which of course was significant. I wouldn't discount it, but it isn't why it was historically significant. And that now we saw 100 million people online at the same time in the age of dial-up, and
Right.
that really changed the way culture worked. Suddenly, it didn't matter where you lived, class, race, all of those things were flattened. You could be connecting with people all over the world, wherever. All you needed was a dial-up modem. Um, YouTube is now, all these years later, by far the largest global community on the planet, by
Hmm.
far, by far.
Right.
With Google being its parent company, between Google being the number one search engine on the
Search
planet and
engine.
YouTube being the number two, you're dealing with one company that has all of the eyeballs on the planet.
Right.
Uh, so that there's a story there, right? You know? And I hadn't seen it being told. Gail Ann Hurd, who was amazing, had seen my other tech docs and came to me and said she had some access within YouTube. Did I want to partner with her on this? And I said, absolutely. I've been trying to get my head around the rise of Google for years, and this is a great way in. So we embarked on doing this together.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm so glad you did, because I have my opinions on this topic. Having over 12,000 videos on YouTube myself, interviewing people in the entertainment industry. So tell me, how do you think YouTube has changed the way we consume media and interact with each other?
Well, there's a number of ways that it has,
Mm.
and many of them are positive. I would say. So, the very first thing that it did was to those of us who were already had been online. I'd been online, geez, for 20 years. 20 years when YouTube showed up. So longer. It was a game changer, because as soon as you saw how easy it was, which is all about how these things. That's how Steve Jobs made Apple
Right.
happen, right? As soon as you see video being moved around easily, you realize it's not just me and my nerdy friends that are going to be able to do this. Now everyone's going to do this. Sort of what happened with email. Like, we were all
Mm.
communicating via text-based internet well before email took off, before you had AOL and you got mail. But when that happened, you realized, okay, now everyone's going to do this, right? And that's going to change the way the planet communicates. Video on YouTube was the same. It was like, okay, now the whole world has the means of distribution at their fingertips, the means of production and the means of distribution. So it was really clear that it was going to connect the world in a new way, in a significant way. But it was also clear that it was going to completely upend the entertainment industry and media as we knew it. It was evident in 2006. Just like Napster was, you immediately realized where we were going to end up when Napster
Hmm.
happened, with like now where
Right.
we are with streaming all these years later. Um, so those are very significant things. But then you have these sort of offshoots that are also significant. It's like the Library of Alexandria. Everything is there. So now anyone's ability, provided they have internet access or access to a library or any way to get on YouTube, has access to basically all of the recorded information of all of human history at their fingertips visually, which is very, very powerful.
Mm.
But also, it flattened sort of diversity walls right away. I mean, long before the entertainment industry picked up on their diversity initiatives, you had trans, LGBT, you had people of every kind of color and race able to communicate, have content, draw people to their stories all over the world, and have an audience in a way that just did not exist before. And I just think
Mm.
that's huge.
Right. So, what do you bring up, at least in the documentary, the ethical issues around the algorithm. So, what what do you think the reason is, and what is the impact?
I would ask. I mean, we bring up the algorithm because you can't not talk about the algorithm. But I would argue, and we talk about this in the film. I would argue it's less of an algorithmic issue than it is a kind of a parasocial issue and a business incentive issue.
Mhm.
And that's where the ethics come into play, because the parasocial component, I think, is what makes YouTube so powerful. When you have billions of views, and views, as you said yourself with your own channel, is you and me in our homes talking to each other through a webcam where it looks like we're literally engaging with each other across the dining room table, right,
Mm.
is extremely powerful, which is why you have the immediate rise of influencers going all the way back to, the Fine Brothers and Smosh and the very early days of YouTube's rise. It was just like, you're my best friend. You're in my living room. We've always known each other. Like, and when you start to have negative influencers and you have negative and full-throated propaganda and hate speech and incentive calls to violence being operating that way in a parasocial way, the algorithm doesn't really matter anymore.
Mhm.
And what matters is what kicks in then is the business model, which is an ad-based business model that's incentivized to keep you on the platform to get as many eyeballs as possible. And
Right.
despite the fact that every social, it's not just YouTube and Google, every platform is full of baloney when they say that their advertisers would never want to be attaching their content to, Steven Crowder calling for civil war. It's the
Right.
opposite of that, right? Like
Mhm.
if Steven Crowder's calling for civil war and he's getting millions and millions and millions of views, well, most advertisers are going to want to hitch their wagon to that on some level, and they do. And there's a
Right.
lot of money in that. And Google, I think, is really unable to police themselves because they have a board, they have shareholders, and if their CEO went to the shareholders and said, "We're now going to stop all of this content," they would be frog marched out of the building, and that would be the end of their job. So I think that's really where we have an ethical issue. I think that the ethical issue in the last week, right before an election year, YouTube took down their rule of deplatforming the 2020 misinformation around the Stop the Steal movement. So that's literally within the last week. It's the opposite of content moderation. It's content demoderation, right? They
Mhm.
had the
Right.
power to deplatform those voices, and they said, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to let all hell loose, essentially, right as we cruise into 2024.
Mm. Can you share some of the interesting things you found out while you were making this doc?
I mean, I'll share some just because it would take
Oh no,
a
just a
long
few.
time, but because the fact is, you learn an enormous amount as you go. And I came to the story knowing all of the basics of how the mechanics of YouTube run and the kind of major story beats of what the significant markers were that in its growth, both for good and ill. I didn't quite realize how much YouTube is really just Google's media front end. That's been kind of, I wouldn't say hidden because that sounds, I think, unfairly nefarious. But it has been superficially misdirected in the sense that they have separate campuses, they're talked about as separate companies, and they're really not. They're really fused together. And Susan Wojcicki, who's an amazing person, I wouldn't disparage at all. I think did a great job at that company overall. She came out of Google from the very beginning of Google, and she was the one who sparked the sale. And it's always been embedded in that company, and I think that's significant. I think that when you have the largest tech company on the planet, arguably one of the largest companies on the planet, that's a monopoly, that also has the largest media platform on the planet. I did not go into the story knowing that, and when I figured that out, it shifted the sort of direction of the story I was telling a little bit.
My last question for you. What do you hope people will take away after watching this?
I don't think, I think that I don't try to suggest that we're going to blow people's minds, right? I usually take information that's already kind of out there and contextualize it, but we tell a story with human beings, right? There's a cast of characters here. They're
Right.
people. There are human implications to these stories. Again, both for good and ill. There's an inspiration factor. There's an ambition factor. There's an innovation factor, all of which are legitimate. And we show through Steve and Susan and other people, Natalie Wynn, people who are doing amazing things on the platform. But there's also some very painful repercussions and, you know, life-altering repercussions, and we show those through people. So I want people to be emotionally impacted. I think that's probably the takeaway, as opposed to a thesis, right? Like, go do this. I think that it's really about having an emotional connection, because I think that will drive the individuals themselves to do what needs to be done.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for making this. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. And thank you for your talents over the years. I won't discuss how many, but it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
You're
Thanks.
welcome.
Bye-bye.